In this chapter, we will explore the steps involved in backing up and performing a complete system restoration using the backup and restore functionality. This process is particularly beneficial when an anynode installation has been accidentally deleted or overwritten. Initially, we explore the general concept, covering restoration capabilities and limitations, and providing a brief overview of the hot standby feature. Following that, we take a closer look at the required prerequisites. Next, in the Create Backup section, we will illustrate the process of generating and locating a backup file. Additionally, we will provide instructions on creating a backup file using REST API and Windows PowerShell ISE. For Linux users, the provided shell script can be employed to create a backup via REST API. Finally, moving on to the restoration process, the Restore Backup section details the crucial steps for importing the saved backup file and restoring your anynode configuration. General concept. With the backup function in anynode, you can save the entire anynode configuration, including all settings, recordings, logs, and certificates. This provides the option of quickly restoring a complete anynode system. This function proves beneficial in the following scenarios: operating system failure, complete replacement of a faulty hard drive, migration to a more robust system, migration to from a virtual machine, accidental deletion of anynode, accidental configuration changes. The backup supplements the previous configuration export. Utilizing the previous export function through configuration and export is recommended for efficiently creating backups of the node configuration. This allows for rapid testing without the risk of accidentally deleting the call history. In this case, only the SIP-based settings will be backed up and restored. Anynode does not support differential or incremental backups. At a minimum, we recommend a configuration backup after significant changes to the configuration. The full backup integrates log files and recordings into your strategy. If you have an external database with an existing backup strategy, consider writing CDR data and logging files into this database. What data can we restore? The scope of the backup depends on the backup option you choose. The full configuration backup. This option includes comprehensive settings and data related to the anynode frontend, anynode configuration, and anynode monitor configuration. Anynode frontend configuration, user management, LDAP authorities, Azure AD authority, web server connectors, backends, certificate issuances, certificates, Acme services, account and password settings, Microsoft Teams SBA, proxy server settings. Anynode configuration, audio files, tones and announcements, static HTTP server resources, every configuration object, every auxiliary object. Anynode monitor configuration. Without call history and event log. SMTP clients, event transport, call history settings, event log settings, licenses warning settings, certificates warning settings, active session settings, disk space warning settings. The full backup. This option encompasses everything included in the full configuration backup, plus additional data. In addition to all the components listed under the full configuration backup, it also includes call history, event log data, and recorded sessions, subject to the requirement of having an anynode user with a media recorder rule. Anynode frontend configuration, user management, LDAP authorities, Azure AD authority, web server connectors, backends, certificate issuances, certificates, Acme services, account and password settings, Microsoft Teams SBA, proxy server settings. Anynode configuration, audio files, tones and announcements, static HTTP server resources, every configuration object, every auxiliary object. Anynode monitor configuration, call history, event log, SMTP clients, event transport, call history settings, event log settings, licenses warning settings, certificates warning settings, active session settings, disk space warning settings. Recorded sessions, an anynode user with a media recorder rule is required. What data can we not restore? Licenses. Due to licensing restrictions, licenses are not restored during backup and restore operations. Licenses must always be manually reinstalled. If needed, please refer to our video tutorial on licensing. External database files. Only the database access is restored when utilizing external databases, such as Microsoft Entra ID. The directory in anynode will be repopulated with data from the database. For external call history and event databases, backup and restore operations are not conducted. These processes are exclusive to the internal, SQLite, database. Only the access to the external database is backed up and restored. File structure. In essence, with every installation of any node on Windows, there are two paths to consider. C:\program files /te systems and C:\program data /te systems, hidden folder, with a folder structure. The program files folder contains the application files of any node, while the program data folder stores the data used for working with any node. The individual folders for a full backup under Windows are as follows. Anynode configuration file. Anynode_frontend, anynode frontend file. Anynode MON, call history and events, monitor configuration file. Recordings, all media recordings. Info.txt, information about version numbers and list of recordings. In Linux, the following program paths are utilized. For non-variable data. For variable data, for instance configuration data, IPC data, trace data. The individual parameters for a full backup under Linux are as follows. Anynode_config. Media_files. HTTP_server_files. Frontend_config. Monitor_config. Call_history. Event_log. Media_files refer to the audio files configured in the node under tones and announcements. To include recordings, you would need to add recordings to the list. Remember that you need a user with administrator and media recorder roles to access the recordings. Prerequisites. You need an anynode version of 4.10.6 or higher for the backup and restore function. To utilize the backup function through PowerShell and the REST API, you need at least anynode version 4.12. We always recommend using external storage for the backup file. The default user, anadmin, automatically possesses all necessary permissions for the backup and restore functions. A newly created user must have the administrator role in the anynode user management to perform backup and restore operations. You will need a separate user with administrator and media recorder roles to back up media recordings. Please ensure that the new anynode version is at least at the level of the backup. If you intend to use a newer anynode version, it should be within the same release, second part of the version number. For example, generating the backup with version 4.10.17 and restoring with version 4.10.18. You cannot use a backup created with a newer version of any node. Create backup. In this segment, you will gain comprehensive insights into the seamless generation of a backup file, with the added convenience of automation via REST API integration. The default user anadmin has all rights for creating a backup, with one exception. The backup of media recordings can only be performed by a new user with administrator and media recorder roles. To secure recorded sessions, create a new user with administrator and media recorder roles through anynode's user management. Please note that the file size can increase when many recordings are included in the backup. Then, initiate the backup function with this newly created user. Click on Extras, User Management and Users, Roles and Policies in the upper menu. At this point, we won't describe the individual steps in the anynode user management. However, you can typically use the default values there. Now let's consider the individual steps for creating a successful backup. Click on Configuration and Backup in the upper menu. Choose what to include in the backup. Either the complete configuration can be exported, or only the configuration of a specific service. The first option, Full Configuration Backup, encompasses the anynode configuration along with audio files and static HTTP server resources. It includes the anynode frontend configuration and the anynode monitor configuration, excluding the call history and event log. The second option, Full Backup, allows for maximum data backup. In our example, we will opt for the second option. Normally, this option would encompass recorded sessions. However, in our example, we have the default anadmin user as the current user. The default user, anadmin, lacks permission to access the recordings, so the recordings will be excluded. To secure recorded sessions, create a new user with administrator and media recorder roles through anynode's user management. The third option, Select Manually what will be included, enables individual selection. Click on the Next button to continue. You have the option to protect the downloaded backup files with a password. This is the default setting. Activate Encrypt the data with a password. Your password should have a minimum of 8 characters. Number sequences are not allowed. It is recommended to use a combination of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Avoid using words or names of people, characters, organizations, products, or anything else that can be easily guessed or associated with you. Click the Next button to proceed. The assistant suggests a file name with date and time, but you can also freely choose your own. Click on Finish. Anynode will gather all the necessary data and save it as a zip file. The compilation of the required data is done in the background, allowing you to continue working in the frontend during this process. An additional status window will keep you informed about progress. Please ensure the download is complete before using the zip file. Click on the Close button. Afterward, a zipped file will be downloaded to your system's download folder. Depending on the chosen backup type and media recorder rules, you will find a folder structure with recordings. Create configuration backup via REST API and Windows PowerShell. The anynode REST API support and Windows PowerShell allow you to automate the backup process, enabling you to schedule regular backups without manual intervention. This ensures that critical configurations and data are consistently backed up at specified intervals. We would like to point out that the following commands only work for Windows PowerShell users. To utilize the REST API, you can either use the existing default connector or create a new one. It's crucial to enable the REST service explicitly on the connector intended for API access. Please note that the previously mentioned rights for administration and media recorder are also necessary in this context. You need at least anynode version 4.12 or later. Refer to our REST API documentation for more details. In the upper anynode frontend menu, navigate to Info and REST API documentation, and read Chapter General. The default connector for the anynode frontend at http://127.0.0.1 already has activated rights for access via REST API. To check if your connector has REST API rights, navigate to the top menu, go to Extras, Web Server, Connectors. Choose a connector and click on the Edit button. The Web Server Connector Assistant will open. Under Services, check if REST API is enabled. Then, click on the Finish button. In our example, we will use the default connector at http://127.0.0.1 and the Windows PowerShell Integrated Scripting Environment, ISE. Before you can use the API, the anynode PowerShell module needs to be imported. Depending on the operating system, the module file can be found here. Open Windows PowerShell ISE. When importing a module in PowerShell, you might encounter the need to change the execution policy with Set Execution Policy, Unrestricted, Scope Process. Click on the Yes button to change the execution policy. Execute the command to import the anynode PowerShell module. If needed, verify the path and file name of the module. Click on the Run Once button to run the script. In our example, we are using the default connector for the anynode frontend without a certificate. This command disables certificate checks for the rest of the PowerShell session. Disable certificate check. If you are using a self-signed certificate for the connection, you can temporarily trust the certificate with the following command. Get anynode web server certificate. Now execute the command to create the backup file. In our example, we demonstrate the creation of a full configuration backup. If you only want to secure individual components, you must use request parameters for included data. Here, we are using the default address and port of the anynode frontend, along with the standard user anadmin. Adjust these values if you are using a different connector or user. Create anynode config backup address 127.0.0.1, port 8088, credential anadmin. For a full backup, use the following request parameters for included data. Media_files refers to the audio files configured in the node under tones and announcements. To include recordings, you would need to add recordings to the list. Remember that you need a user with administrator and media recorder roles to access the recordings. Subsequently, enter your password for accessing anynode in the Windows PowerShell credential request. Click on the OK button. Enter a file name for the backup file. The file format is .zip and should be included in the file name. Subsequently, the compressed backup file will be generated, downloaded, and saved in the specified path. Create configuration backup via REST API on Linux with shell script. For Linux users not using PowerShell, we provide an included shell script that only needs minimal editing of the parameters. Anynode provides the corresponding shell script with every Linux installation. The path to the script is: to utilize the REST API, you can either use the existing default connector or create a new one. It's crucial to enable the REST service explicitly on the connector intended for API access. Please note that the previously mentioned rights for administration and media recorder are also necessary in this context. You need at least anynode version 4.12 or later. Refer to our REST API documentation for more details in the following steps in the Web Server Connector Assistant. Our REST API documentation can be accessed directly through the anynode frontend. In the upper anynode frontend menu, navigate to Info and REST API documentation, and read Chapter, General. To check if your connector has REST API rights, navigate to the top menu, go to Extras, Web Server, Connectors. Choose a connector and click on the Edit button. The Web Server Connector Assistant will open. Under Services, check if REST API is enabled. Then, click on the Finish button. Open your terminal or shell application on your anynode server or connect over SSH. We recommend not executing the script in the same directory but rather in the folder where you intend to store the backup file afterward. Here is an example where the script is copied from its original location to the directory /home/anadmin/. Now, you must input the IP address under which the anynode frontend is accessible, as well as the authentication credentials of the user from the anynode installation with the necessary permissions, into the script. The command nano opens the nano text editor, allowing you to edit the content of the backup.sh file. Navigate to anynode equals 127.0.0.1 and enter the address and port of the anynode frontend. In our example, this is 172.18.0.149:443. Navigate to path equals and specify the path where the backup file should be saved. In our example, we use the / command to execute a program or script in the current directory. Navigate to cred equals anadmin, password and enter the credentials of an anynode user with configuration write access and rest access. Go to backup parameter and modify the backup parameters to your needs. The default script creates a full backup excluding recordings. To include recordings, you would need to add recordings to the list. Remember that you need a user with administrator and media recorder roles to access the recordings. Save the script with Ctrl+O. Close the script with Ctrl+X. Make the script executable afterward by executing. In the context of performing a backup command via REST API, curl is employed to send HTTP requests to the REST API endpoint responsible for initiating the backup process. Install curl with the following command, if necessary. apt install curl. Execute the script. /backup.sh. Use dir or ls to display the contents of the current directory. The backup file is generated and saved. The zip file is timestamped in the file name, facilitating control over a current backup. Backup with a hot standby system. With the anynode hot standby feature, you define important rules so that a secondary anynode system can take over in an emergency as part of a high availability configuration. Via the graphical user interface of this feature, all conditions for a switchover to the secondary standby system and back can be individually set. If you intend to perform a backup and restore using a hot standby system, there are several crucial considerations to keep in mind. Backup primary system. Create a backup as described previously. Ensure that the backup includes at least the front-end configuration. Backup secondary system. Do not use the combo box in the top right menu to switch to the secondary system. You must physically access the front end of the secondary system. Create a backup here as described previously, ensuring that it includes at least the front-end configuration. Performing backup when call history and events are stored in an external database. For external call history and event databases, backup and restore operations are not conducted. These processes are exclusive to the internal SQLite database. Only the access to the external database is backed up and restored. For the external database, utilize a full backup including the anynode monitor configuration under the backup options. The anynode monitor configuration always includes the setup for accessing the external database. Restore backup. This chapter describes the key steps in the restoration process. We will also delve into the procedures and considerations involved in restoring data on a hot standby system. Starting with a single anynode instance, we will explain with a step-by-step instruction how to bring your anynode back to work. To fully restore an anynode system, you should check if you have write access in the anynode frontend. If not, click on Configuration and take control in the upper menu. Navigate to Configuration in the upper menu and choose Restore. Do not use the Configuration Import Assistant. Click on the Choose File button. In the Configuration Backup Restoration Assistant, choose the backup zip file and enter the password for the uploaded file, if needed. Click on the OK button. You will get an overview with details of the chosen backup file. Click on the Next button to proceed. If needed, adjust the network controller settings with the Edit button. Otherwise, click on the Next button. In this scenario, we are migrating to new hardware and must customize the network controller configurations accordingly. In our case, the new network controller is configured as the Microsoft Hyper-V network adapter for our new hardware. Click on OK. Once all network controllers have been adjusted to the new hardware, we receive a summary displaying both the old and new network interfaces. Click on the Next button. Adjust the web server connectors according to your requirements. The corresponding connector will be automatically installed when using an Acme service for certificate management, regardless of the selected option. The default setting is keep the current web server connector of the new anynode without any option for editing or adjustments. The option use the connectors of the imported configuration will overwrite all existing connectors on the new anynode. If you've previously set up connectors in the old anynode and want to continue using them on the new anynode, use this option. Click on the connector and use Edit to adjust the network settings, if necessary. Please note that with this option, depending on your connector's configuration, you may lose access to your system after executing the restore function if the connector from the backup is utilized. The option use the connectors of the imported configuration but keep the currently used connector allows you to apply the settings from the imported configuration, but the existing connector on the new anynode that is currently in use will remain unaffected. Utilize the Edit option to modify the network settings as needed. In our example, we will use the default value and keep the current web server connectors. Click on the Next button to continue. Choose how to manage users from the imported anynode frontend configuration. The option Keep the user accounts, Azure AD authority, and LDAP authorities currently configured for this anynode will not import all existing users, Azure AD, and LDAP authorities from the old anynode. You'll need to utilize the existing user management on the new anynode or create a new one accordingly. If you've previously set up users in the user management of the old anynode and want to continue using them, use the option to overwrite the user accounts while resetting the password of anadmin and enabling the account. The password for the standard user anadmin will always be reset. Assign a new password following the already established rules. The password must contain a minimum of 8 characters and should not include number sequences like 1, 2, 3, 4 for security reasons. The wizard will inform you during input whether the password is valid. In our example, we'll utilize the users previously created in the old anynode and import them to the new anynode. Click on the Next button to proceed. The Configuration Backup Restoration Assistant has now gathered all the necessary settings and is ready to perform the restoration. Click on Apply the uploaded configuration. Click on the Finish button to close the Configuration Backup Restoration Assistant. Upon successfully restoring the backup file, you will need to reclaim write permissions for technical reasons. In the upper menu, click on Configuration and take control. Congratulations, your new anynode is now ready for immediate use with the previous configuration on the new hardware. Create configuration restore via REST API. At this point, we want to emphasize that there is no REST API support for the restore function. If you want to use the restore function on a system different from the one where the backup was created, you must perform a network controller mapping in the anynode frontend. This functionality is not available via the REST API. Restore with a hot standby system. In this chapter, we will delve into the procedures and considerations involved in restoring data on a hot standby system. Restore on a primary and secondary system. Create a restore on the secondary system as described previously, ensuring that it includes at least the front-end configuration. Before setting up a new replication connection between the primary and secondary systems, make sure to restore the system. The restoration process for the secondary system mainly deals with front-end settings, like user management, web server connector, and certificate issuance, and monitor configurations, such as call history, event logs, and monitor settings, rather than the anynode configuration itself, which gets replicated from the main system anyway. During a backup, IPC access files, which contain private keys and information about which processes in any node can access interprocess communication, are not generally backed up. Therefore, during a restore, you must manually create the local connector on the secondary system again, import it to the primary system, and re-add the IPC file on the primary system. On the secondary system, navigate to Extras, Backends, Local and Connectors. Do not use the combo box in the top right menu to switch to the secondary system. You must physically access the front end of the secondary system. Click on the Add button to add a local connector. Choose the option, Create a connector to replicate the anynode configuration from another system to this one. Refer to our hot standby video tutorial for details and further steps. Save the file for import on the primary system and click Finish. Then, perform the restore on the primary system. If the anynode frontend configuration is included in the backup, you need to delete the imported backend on the primary system. Navigate to Extras, Backends, Remote, Instances. Choose the existing backend and click on the Remove button. Confirm the deletion with Yes. Click on the Import button. Click on the Choose File button and select the backend definition file you want to import. Click OK. Choose the option, Start the replication directly and overwrite the configuration of the replica system. Click on the OK button to close the import assistant. Select the imported backend and click on the Edit button. Click on the Next button. Under any node, click on the Export button for the IPC access file. Click on the Finish button. Click on the OK button to close the backend's overview. Navigate to your hot standby in the left menu tree and click on the IPC client object. Click on the Import button. In the IPC Client Import Assistant, click on the Choose File button and import the IPC access file. Click on the Next button. Select a network controller that determines the interface and/or IP address to be used for the communication to the IPC server. The IPC server must be reachable via this network controller. In our example, we will use a fixed IP address. With these settings, a connection to the IPC server should be established. Click on the Finish button to close the assistant. Use Commit. Navigate to the hot standby object and check for an active hot standby system. Restore on a primary system only. During a restore operation that exclusively involves the primary system, you only need to execute the restore process. No further manual actions are required in this case. Restore on a secondary system only. Perform the restore on the secondary system. Subsequently, follow the steps described earlier for a full restore on both primary and secondary systems. Performing restore when call history and events are stored in external database. For external call history and event databases, backup and restore operations are not conducted. These processes are exclusive to the internal database. Only the access to the external database is backed up and restored. Once access to the external database is restored during the restore process, the data becomes immediately accessible in the monitor mode. Make sure the database access is not restricted to a specific host or IP address when restoring any node on a new host. Congratulations! You have now learned all the crucial details for a successful backup and restore.